Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. This time, we won't mince around because this is a complex subject that we need to cover today, and with me is a friend and a journalist from Latvia, Juris Kaža, which you have heard in the past in our episodes about Latvian election. I think it was a couple of years ago, but I thought this subject was serious enough to get some help. So, hey, Juris, how are you doing today?
Hey, well, I'm glad to be here, although I must say that I'm not a military expert. I don't read or speak Russian, so I'm not all that much help on that account. But my kind of regular coverage for the Spanish news agency EFI has been all about the local reactions here to the events in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia. So it's kept me busy, and I'm aware of what's going on.
I think you also know a lot about the American reaction to this whole matter, because I've heard a lot of people speak on the news and interviews that some people are blaming the United States for this conflict or something, and I don't know why. So maybe you can explain this?
Well, you can sort of try to make a really bad and fragile case for blaming the U.S. by saying that at some point the Russians understood that the position of the U.S., the strongest power in NATO, and of NATO, was that NATO would not be expanded to the east, and that it happened anyway, and therefore the Russians feel to some extent somewhat betrayed. I mean, yeah, these are the people who have an impeccable record of keeping treaties and promises, and then suddenly they come up and say, hey, you betrayed us. But in all of these 25 years since 1997, when allegedly this idea was expressed, who's joined? I mean, the three Baltic countries all together have military forces that are roughly the equivalent of maybe one Russian division. So I mean, they're not a threat. I don't know where the Russians get this idea that they are in some way threatened by the eastern expansion of NATO, because none of the new countries have any kind of assault capability that could threaten Russia. I mean, how many tanks are there in the Baltic countries, other than a few tanks that rotate with the NATO forces in the forward enhanced battle group? Well, there aren't many. I mean, it's a different story with Poland. Poland is a stronger military. Maybe, you look down at countries like Hungary and Romania, but still, none of them have the same military capabilities and strength, or at least if you look at the numbers, as Russia does.
Yeah, I mean, there's one battalion of NATO forces in each of the Baltic states, and there are 18 battalions next to our border for one. 9 times more soldiers already, over there. So, I don't know. This whole being threatened by NATO expansion seems kind of weird, since, we've been in NATO for quite a while now, and we've never been a threat. And I heard that Nikolai Svanidze, one of the journalists that I follow from Dozhd, he stated that, well, Russia has gotten super scared lately. So that's kind of weird.
I don't know what they would be super scared of. Well, I can imagine what they would be super scared of, but they are not super scared of the military capabilities of the borderline NATO nations, nor for that matter even of the military capabilities of NATO as a whole. There are not very many American troops in the area. Certainly, if a crisis was triggered, there would be a rapid buildup of American forces in the area, airborne and others, and maybe a carrier battle group off, as close to the Baltic region as it was safe for it to operate. But other than that, nothing of that sort is going on here. What I think Russia is afraid of is Ukraine, despite being a rather corruption-ridden society still, of Ukraine evolving in a new direction of increased democratization, economic prosperity, and a noticeable and sharp reduction in corruption, and going back to Putin's rantings about how the Ukrainians are just sort of Russians who lost their way, or, call them what you will. That would be a rather shocking example for the Russian people, that their lost cousins are doing better than they are. Their lost cousins are sort of becoming informally a part of the European Union. that their lost cousins are eliminating the kind of corruption that we see a lot in Russia, and above all, that they're eliminating the kind of authoritarian and repressive way of governing their country. There are problems in the Ukraine, but you do not have the vast repression of dissent and control of the media and all of that you see going on in Russia. I think that's a threat.
Yeah, I agree with this because I wanted to touch on this specifically since, well, I wrote about this in an article recently for the Foreign Policy about the history part. And, Russia needs to pick up this Kiev and Rus battalion. So, to be this Russian president, because Russia and Ukraine are very tied. For example, if Ukraine starts to develop very quickly, then the Russian people might be, interested in how their neighbors are developing so quickly. And they might actually, start to blame Putin for their problems. Putin might actually lose popular support in this way. So,
well, they would be right. They would be right in blaming Putin and his kind of autocratic, authoritarian oligarchy that he's built up around himself. Now, as I said, I do not understand Russian, but I have a family member who watches, my wife, who watches a lot of these Russian TV broadcasts that are kind of talk shows. Where they bring in various people, some guy, some famous actor, his lover, his wife, some person in the family who's drinking themselves to death. In this program, you often see scenes from the countryside in Russia, from outside of Moscow. And that's a third world out there. And a lot of people say this, that you have a number of highly developed urban cities that could, be mistaken for Europe, or, even Moscow could be mistaken for, Chicago or someplace. But once you go outside the metropolitan areas in Russia, you're back in a sort of the semi-third world. It's basically your Borat, goats and cattle in the street among broken down shacks type of scene.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say the same thing, that Russia is St. Petersburg and Moscow, and outside of that is, well, the real Russia. There's a major difference there. And I think a year ago there was a report about how someone had stolen 20 kilometers of road, literally of asphalt, and then sold it on the black market. That was in some sort of administrator thing. So there's insane corruption, and quality of life is much lower. And in the meantime, I think that, targeted sanctions, they also hurt because, there's this joke in Russian when a kid comes home from school and says, Daddy, I heard that, the prices of vodka are going to get increased. Will this mean that you'll drink less? And Daddy turns to him and answers, no, son, it means that you'll eat less. And I think that's kind of one of the effects as well lately. And Putin kind of wants to shift the blame to the West about the sanctions because, not like his cronies are stealing less, it's just that they're stealing, well, more to compensate in a way, I suppose.
That could be one of the effects of sanctions. But the thing, of course, sanctions as far as trade and financial transactions with the West will affect the metropolitan areas more. I don't think there are too many people out in the backwaters of Russia that are buying late model cars, or that they're doing anything, that would involve transactions, financial transactions or purchases from Western companies of not even luxury, but sort of middle class goods. But it'll hit at the middle class in Russia, and these are the people basically who are supposed to be the intelligent voters out there in the Russian electorate, and they should, if we could use such words, they need a kick in the ass to realize, what the people they have elected or what the people they sort of passively are supporting are doing to them and are doing to their countries and are doing to their sons and daughters if there is indeed a shooting war in the next week or so.
I was wondering, by the way, about the fact that if a shooting war breaks out, what are the chances Ukraine actually, manages to keep things going? And if they manage to stand against aggression, do you think they maybe could actually go and waltz into Crimea? If this goes well for them, I don't know. What's the Ukrainian side? What could be like the strength of them?
I don't know what the Ukrainians' plans are. Certainly the Ukrainians would like to have Crimea back. And certainly the Crimeans would like to have Ukraine back, interestingly enough, because there is the population of the Crimean Tatars who were well treated and could live their own lives in Ukraine. There were no serious problems for the residents of Crimea as part of Ukraine that were any more serious than problems for Ukrainians in general. So what I could see in kind of best worst case scenario or worst best case scenario would be a kind of repeat of the 1939 Russia, Finland, or Soviet Union, Finland Winter War. Lest we forget that World War II, which the Russians tried to paint over as the Great Patriotic War from 1941 to 1945, was actually the Second World War, in which the initial aggressors were both Germany and the Soviet Union, with Germany attacking Poland, Soviet Union moving in when the Germans had already basically smashed the Poles pretty badly, and then the Soviet Union attacking little neutral Finland. What happened was it was very hard going for the Finns, but the Finns managed to very badly damage the initial army group that was sent to take Finland. It was only when Russia had to mobilize kind of like a second wave and try to break through the Mannerheim line and all that they got down to trying to negotiate some sort of a peace. But not before, basically, the initial surge of Russians into or Soviet troops into Finland had been pretty badly decimated. Of course, it's a different battle environment now than Finland in 1939. But
yeah, I mean, from Russia's perspective, I watch a lot of very weird YouTube channels about this subject. One of them is Roy TV, a Russian far-right opposition to Putin, where Igor Girkin, the Strelkov, the separatist leader, is often a guest. Yesterday, he managed to publicly admit that, according to his knowledge, because he keeps in touch with all the people in Donbass, Russia is now sending our private warfare company Wagner guys in there. And he was very disappointed about their discipline and morale and everything. From the Russian perspective, I guess this will be blamed as a Ukrainian assault on Donbass, and then Russia is going to come in to defend their own citizens or something. But they're already there, and they are sending these deniable assets,
Well, they have already created citizens. They've been handing out Russian passports left and right in the Donbass area. Now, Wagner is, it's sort of... I don't know how many will understand the reference, but it's sort of like sending the Russian version of Mikhail's Navy, but in an evil sense. These were these sort of incompetent sailors in an American film comedy. But the Wagners managed to, in the Middle East, I think it was in Syria, managed to stumble upon a unit of American special forces. And they got massacred. There were like a couple of hundred Wagners were killed.
Yeah, I remember that one. I made an episode about this.
Yeah, because the Americans fought American style. First of all, they had pretty good firepower on their side, and then they called it an airstrike and said, "Well, bye-bye, folks."
Yeah, it was pretty bad because I listened to interviews about this from their perspective, and people who were kind of nearby this operation stated that the Wagner guys were under-equipped. They didn't have any night vision equipment, and that they were unprepared for being struck by drones. What I really don't know is how well Ukrainian army. Well, they're motivated, we know that, but we don't know how well they're equipped because what exactly has been provided to them.
Well, I think in the last 8 years, their level of equipment and training has gone up very significantly. They have Turkish drones. There was a big scandal from the Russian side when a Turkish drone blew up an artillery position. They probably have night vision. Night vision is something you can go out and even buy out of your own pocket if you're interested in having it. I hope, reasonably presuming, that they will have American battlefield intelligence if something starts. That they'll have these surveillance aircraft, maybe not in. There's a shooting war, not maybe directly in Ukrainian airspace as they are now, but very nearby, and they'll be able to relay battlefield intelligence to the Ukrainian forces and targeting intelligence and say, look, like there are 20 tanks outside this or that town. The Ukrainians will be able to direct rocket artillery or whatever they happen to be used against this, or move their mobile anti-tank forces and shoot these tanks with javelins and other weapons out of the woods. So I think it'll be a really rough ride for Russia to go into Ukraine, and they will meet well-trained, well-armed, and above all, very motivated soldiers. These people are, what are you going to tell, old Ivan from lower horse's ass Russia as to why he's there? What's he doing there? Yeah.
Well, Ukrainians are fighting for their own land if a shooting war starts out. But talking about American intelligence, this happens a lot on Twitter since, we've heard a lot of reports lately about how Russia is making a provocation and how they're planning. And like a day ago, I think it was how Putin has actually given the order to commence with the war. And at the same time, we had a reaction where 30 countries, including our own Latvia, published a call for Latvian citizens in Ukraine to get out of the country. So how realistic is a war scenario right now? How much should we trust this? Because I think personally that because of these leaks, although some people state that they could just be made up, I believe that they are very real. But I think that these leaks to public about Russia's plans are one of the reasons why we still haven't gotten a true shooting war there.
There is some logic to that, because what we're saying to the Russians and the United States and certainly other Western intelligence services have the capacity and the capability to monitor communications, to observe troop movements with satellites, but that doesn't tell you as much as if you can actually listen to the internal communications of these forces. And they have determined from what's going on, the chatter, so to speak, on military communications, that some kind of an order has been given. And also from observing, the reactions to this kind of communication, that people actually, that this is not false kind of disinformation being spread, because the units are told to move up or reposition, and they do it. So I think the intelligence is good. The question is Putin crazy enough to go ahead with this and basically risk a war that could bring down his own government? Because when the body bags start going back to Russia, and when there is no glorious immediate victory, not that there could be one, people are going to question it. This is not Stalin's Russia. And as I said, what are the Russian troops fighting for compared to what the Ukrainians are fighting for?
Also, a lot of people in the West might not know that, because they often think that such countries like Russia or in the past the Soviet Union, they could just hide the body bags or Gruz 200, cargo 200. But Afghanistan war, for example, which was an example of this, was highly unpopular because, the coffins did came back. People were super unhappy. And, tomorrow we have a Afghan War Remembrance Day as well. It's kind of weird since even now, even about the Wagner thing, I've watched on YouTube a bunch of interviews with mothers and wives and family members of these private warfare company soldiers, who've died, and the Russian government just refuses to admit that they even exist. The Russian policy in this matter is just deny any involvement whatsoever. They don't pay any pensions. They don't give out any funds. That causes a lot of problems there. One interesting thing is, I think that Putin's government is going to feel some pressure and be in trouble when the military, the siloviki, the military, the people with guns, be it Rosgvardia, be it other kinds of forces, they start, protesting against this. There was a couple of years ago this YouTube channel person. He was from Caucasus, but he was one of the desantniki, the special forces guy in Russia.
The sort of assault troops, yeah.
Yeah, and then he started making YouTube videos about how he dislikes Putin and how Putin has betrayed Russia, basically, and how he has done terrible things. And he very quickly was put into jail, and he's sitting there for 3 years now already, or something. They pinned a case up on him and just put him into jail ASAP, since Putin is really, really wary when such people, who actually, because Russia traditionally has a lot of respect for people in the military professions, and Putin knows that the common people will listen to such people who are in the army. So,
well, that just goes to show how repressive Russia is, and how scared they are of the people who theoretically know what they are doing in terms of military affairs, coming out and saying, hey, this is a foolish thing we're doing. I mean, in the U.S., when the Vietnam War started to go sideways, there were also military officers who said this is not a winnable war, but they were not thrown in jail. They were criticized. Maybe some of them might have been asked to resign from the military, but nobody was thrown in jail as far as I remember. I think there's another scenario is, even if they succeed in getting far into the Ukraine, is that the Ukraine is going to become a Slavic Vietnam for Russia, because defeating, breaking through the first lines of Ukrainian defense is not going to end the war. It's going to change the war into a massive guerrilla resistance. You will not be able to walk out into the street in a Russian uniform without drawing a bullet. That's the way things may turn out in some places.
Hello there. Thank you for tuning in into another episode of The Eastern Border. We are so happy to announce that this episode is brought to you by our friends at rusansov.com. If you're looking to buy new art, don't forget to use the code Eastern Border for a discount on us. Remember, head over to rusansov.com and happy shopping! If, however, you want to support our show directly, head over to patreon.com or our website, theeasternborder.lv, to find out how you can help out. For all things Eastern Border, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Discord. And as always, thank you so much for supporting us. We really appreciate each and every one of you. That's all from me now. See you online.
This podcast brought to you by RussianVoiceovers.eu. Enjoy!
One important thing is that last time when I spoke about this, I mentioned one important area to watch is Transnistria, little strip in Moldavia, which is basically still a Russian military base, which still lives in Soviet era style everything. That place is under a blockade now. I wonder how the Belarusian flank will also develop because they have a lot of forces there. If Russia invades currently, I can't even say from where exactly. I think it might be from Belarus or something, but that's one of the reasons why I don't believe this is going to get to a shooting war. Not just yet, definitely, because I have no idea from which direction they could even assault. Like, it could come from Donbass, from Belarus, Transnistria, in Moldova, so...
Well, they're doing that, I think, to keep the Ukrainians guessing and to keep them, scattered. Because the forces that they have in Belarus, the forces that they have just close to Kiev, and the forces that they have in Crimea, all of them could do a lot of damage. I mean, they could head for Mariupol, they could head down the coast, they could do a lot of serious stuff there, assuming that what they actually are able to do is similar to the capabilities that we seem to see from satellite images and all of that. We don't know how many of those tanks how well they're maintained. We don't know how many of those tanks are going to make it past the first line of people with javelins, and how those tanks not making it past the javelins, how that's going to affect the morale of the others, One of the things, again, if you're looking at YouTube and looking at the effects of anti-tank weapons, this is not like something going bang against the side of a tank and then a little smoke comes out. And then this is like World War II stuff that I've seen, that people sort of jump out of the tank and run away, or I don't know what, What happens when these modern anti-tank weapons hit is these tanks turn into infernos. I mean, there's like immediately, like the turret blows off and there's like this 20-meter high spout of flame for like 30 seconds, which basically fries and roasts everything inside the tank. That is something that if I was in the tank behind the one that gets hit would make me sort of reconsider what I was doing there, though.
If you look at the counter-arguments from Russian side, they often claim that, Russia is being surrounded by NATO. Well, if you look at the borders, then you can see that Russia is definitely not surrounded by NATO. Instead, what they're doing is literally surrounding Ukraine with insane amount of military troops. It's kind of hypocritical, don't you think, for Russia to complain?
Of course it is, of course. I mean, but this is nothing new. What is going on here in kind of the broader meta-historical terms is it's trying to reconstruct the Russian Empire again. And the Russian Empire existed as the Russian Empire up until the beginning of the 20th century, when we had, Poland and Baltic countries and other places sort of break away and become independent. Then you had the Soviet Union forming around the same time, and then the Soviet Union trying to take most of these places, or actually taking a lot of these places back, either incorporating them as they did to the Baltic states, or, making them part of their zone of influence or sphere of influence, the Warsaw Pact. This is a historical Russian process of trying to not kind of have some reasonably stable and manageable relations on an equal state-to-state basis with its neighbors, but of either subjugating or intimidating or trying to conquer its immediate neighboring countries, even where these countries are militarily not capable of doing any serious harm to Russia. Different story maybe with Germany, but even Germany failed to defeat Russia in the Second World War.
Talking about Germany, at least the Ukrainians that I follow, they tend to call Germany lately being a bit naive, maybe weird, since Germany is blocking the Estonian weapon sales to Ukraine. They've been acting a bit strange. I believe that the leadership of the EU is now slowly transferring to France, in my opinion, because of these actions, because they're losing some prestige and some face. And, well, it is a bit weird that Germans are so friendly. Although I shouldn't be surprised, since Gerhard Schröder, their ex-chancellor, is, well, still in Gazprom, after all.
There is this whole thing. I mean, the Germans got started with this whole Ostpolitik thing back in the 60s, whatever it was, 70s. To some extent, they did help a little bit more traffic between East and West and between the two diametrically opposite political systems at the time, which is not really the case, although we have basically a kind of semi-dictatorship in Russia now anyway. And then you have the whole element of German guilt and pacifism. I mean, it's pretty clear that when Germany fought the war, the Operation Barbarossa against Russia, they did an incredible amount of harm to Russia, to Russian infrastructure, to the civilian population. And one could even say to the Russian military, but the Russian military was for a long time led by people who didn't know what they were doing, by people who foolishly, wasted Russian lives in various sorts of heroic so-called assaults and whatever against German firepower, which in terms of a war of attrition, of course, they won that way. But whether that was the smartest way to do things is another issue. Then, of course, you have the whole period of the 20s and the 30s when the Germans were able to circumvent some of the Versailles restrictions and experiment with aircraft and with rockets and with a number of other things using Russia as a place where they could do this.
Yeah, I mean, in the 20s, there was a famous tank school in the early 30s in Russia where the German tank officers were trained. It was also well known.
Sure, yeah. Well, those German tank officers came back in 1941, but it is a bizarre relationship, I would say, between Germany and Russia, and up until 1939, 1940, 41, you could sort of understand. The Russians had offered certain opportunities for the Germans. The Germans offered certain opportunities for Russia to purchase raw materials, and they paid for being able to drive around in their tanks in Russia. And then it all fell apart with this incredibly horrific war that they fought with each other, with kind of no regard for human life on either side. And the Russians have certainly not forgotten it, nor have the Germans. The Germans feel, I would assume and then to a large extent rightly, they feel sort of guilt and responsibility for the way they turned Russia into what Timothy Snyder calls the bloodlands, the damage that was done to Russia by the German invasion.
It's been like 30 years since the collapse of the USSR, and Putin's been there for like 20. Does anyone really believe that he actually wins these elections? And do they think that they're doing some help to the Russian people by helping him stay in power with all the economical deals and everything? If they would kind of care about Russia and have this guilt, then maybe they should somehow, encourage Putin to step away from power, at least peacefully, I think, because, at this point, Putin has probably enough money on hidden Swiss bank accounts that he could just buy all of Maldives, say, as an example, right? And he could just go and do whatever. So why isn't he just leaving?
I think money is one of the factors that Putin could offer lucrative jobs to Germans who, like Schröder. Well, I mean, the other thing is, it's not only Germany, it's the United Kingdom, it's Britain, which is the playground. London is the financial and educational playground of the Russian elite. You don't see too many German schools filling up with Russian students from the Moscow elite, but you see that happening in London because, of course, everybody there in Russia wants their kids to learn the international language of business, commerce, and culture. You can disagree with that, which is English, Nobody's going to go teach their kids, the language for ordering dogs around. So how some people speak of German, but
this whole attitude about Russians in the West is kind of hypocritical again from the Russian part, since we know that Lavrov and others just have houses and properties everywhere in Western Europe, and at the same time they're also they also always yell at the West for being evil and everything all the time in the news. And today, ambassador of the Russian Federation in Sweden, Viktor Tatarintsev, stated that, and I'll quote here, first in Russian and then English, Россия насрать на санкции Запада, or Russia shits on Western sanctions. Direct quote.
Yeah. I mean, skiter i sanktioner in Swedish. Yeah. So, well, I mean, that exposes what these guys are all about. I mean, Anne Applebaum had an article now in the Atlantic magazine where she basically said you have to start really talking tough back to the Russians in their own kind of style and terminology, which nobody has done so far. Everybody pretends that, when Russians come out to talk or, to present themselves as this an interview with the Swedish media, that the Russians are engaging in quote unquote diplomacy as we understand it, where, everybody sort of understands the subtext of what they're saying and nobody says anything radical. No, this is not the thing. The Russians are basically saying, fuck off to everybody right now. Literally.
And that's the thing. I've been mentioning this on the show a couple of times, but Putin is an ex-KGB officer, and he really speaks this language of strength. You have to push him back, and that's very visible in the political sphere, even in Latvia. We've gone sort of complacent with this politeness too much that sometimes we don't even, in polite society, we sometimes don't even speak about qualities that, hey, maybe a leader should have, which are maybe not as nice and polite as we would like to portray ourselves being, such as I would much rather prefer that our prime minister, for example, would have some bit of nastiness so that he can grab the people by the balls when needed, certain people in certain cases, in this case, all the weirdos that are making protests, specifically Mr. Zgubzem. We're just so polite that we can't understand this more animalistic language of pure bashing face.
I don't know if a guy like Zgubzem is his prime minister, which I regard as a nightmare.
Oh, where's Krub then?
For those who are not familiar with him, he is a disbarred lawyer who has become a kind of fanatical anti-vaxxer, anti-mandates, anti-lockdowns, anti-public health kind of agitator, making ultimatums to the government saying you must resign and you must let me take over and I will be the next great leader of Latvia.
While getting Russian funding, definitely getting Russian funding since, well, we have allegedly, of course, I have to say here, but definitely a lot of evidence, circumstantial, but still there's plenty of reasons to think that he's getting Russian funding here. What I'm mentioning here is the fact that if our leaders, if our government can't deal with Zgubzems, with this basically nobody, right? How can we trust them to be able to respond to this Ukrainian crisis properly? I mean, do you really believe that, for example, the Baltic states are ready to accept a bunch of refugees from Ukraine because they'll definitely be coming here or to Poland? Do you think we're ready for that too? How are we to respond to the situation?
Well, I mean, when it comes to attitudes toward refugees, there is an incredible amount of skepticism about taking in refugees because the refugees that have shown up so far are the wrong color, the wrong ethnicity, and the wrong religion. And, and people immediately say, we're importing savages, we're importing Islamists, terrorists, and besides, there are these jungle savages from Africa or whatever. I mean, I'm using not my terminology, I'm using kind of terminology you see on social media. So I think if we're not literally overrun, I mean, if we don't have like thousands of Ukrainians sleeping in the parks here, then we will accept that because they're white. They're, what are they officially? They're either Catholic or they're Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox, whatever that church is. And they sort of look like us. And for a lot of the population here, they speak Russian, and that's fine with them. So I don't think there'll be a big problem with that.
But one of the more urgent consequences to this whole situation is, let's say shooting war starts, right? And Russia manages to, stumble upon a block that they can't really roll over that easily. What happens in Russia then? What happens in Belarus, for example? I know that if Belarus tries to take part in all this situation, I am pretty sure that major protests will erupt instantly. But in Russia, I'm not so sure. In one case, I really believe that, Russia could even fall apart. For example, Ramzan Kadyrov would definitely not stay in any Russia that has any sort of democratic reforms. But I have no idea. I have no idea of the repercussions.
Certainly, I think the sooner that we have successful, low in human cost protests in Belarus, the better. Because I think Belarus is sort of like a smaller Ukraine. They also want to be part of the West. They also want to be a democracy. They've been waiting for this for 27 years under this guy that they can't seem to get rid of. If the protests break out, unfortunate or maybe not so unfortunate consequence of that will be is that Lukashenko and his people will end up like Ceausescu. Somebody will, they will be taken away to the nearest forest clearing and blown away. That would be rough justice. The right thing to do, of course, would have a big trial for all of these people and all of their Secret Service folks and all that stuff. But
if something like that happens, I think that is the sad fate of authoritarian leaders. And it's probably not even going to be protesters who do the shooting here. I believe that it might as well be some people who are also involved in the whole situation who just shoot him to, buy their own amnesty, buy their own freedoms, and not.
Well, yeah, probably. Yeah, that's the way these things usually end. I mean, it's sort of the Ceausescu or Mussolini variant, but I would find that kind of satisfying. The guy finally got what he deserves.
Lukashenko is gone utterly insane, and I believe that even if Putin starts something, Lukashenko's going to jump because like a little lapdog, he's just going to run after the big thing. And
we don't know. I mean, we don't know what the Belarusian military thinks, and the Belarusian military is going to realize that they're all going to just simply be a part of the Russian army now, or what? They're going to lose some kind of influence. They're going to any corrupt networks that they've set up may be broken down, or the guys may come in and say, well, we're taking over now, whatever you guys have been doing, selling fuel to the farmers or something, which is a common racket for these Soviet style armies, and that's it.
On the other hand, do you think that if this invasion happens, I think that Sweden and Finland will definitely join NATO like the very same day?
Well, not the same day, but it'll push it over the edge. I was talking to an ancestry Swedish retired military man, Carlos Neretnieks, who you may or may not have heard of. He's a major general in the Swedish army, and he had a long military career, and he was actually the rector of the Defense University, Swedish Defense University, sort of like the West Point of Sweden, but he's now retired. He says that, yeah, definitely, that would push both of these countries over the edge. Finland would go first, and the Swedes would follow. Not very happily, reluctantly, because it's always been this kind of fundamental feeling that you don't join NATO officially. You do not signal that you like NATO in Sweden, while at the same time it was pretty clear, and this is what Carlos Neretnieks sort of told me, that the Swedes were always ready to deal with NATO if something bad should happen. That they were ready to share information, that, they had the same military frequencies. There were even a number of this he didn't tell me, but I've read this elsewhere. There are a number of Swedish military airfields. The runway is a lot longer than one needs for landing the Swedish Viggen and Gripen aircraft. It could take NATO aircraft. So if worse came to worse, these countries would de facto, cooperate with NATO to defend themselves, or to help defend or deal with a bad situation in the Baltic countries.
Yeah, this is kind of weird because we've been talking in a very realpolitik type of conversation here so far. Maybe wrap this up. I want to kind of take a step back here and think about this fact how we're kind of worried about a massive European war again, because this is not going to be somewhat proxy-ish like happened in Donbass, and this isn't going to happen like in Georgia. But isn't it weird that it's the 21st century and we still have to follow this? On one hand, I kind of think that maybe Putin's living in the past, since we know that he doesn't actually read internet. He gets his news about what's happening on the net from little red binders provided to him by his Secret Service, and he doesn't even use a smartphone, so maybe he's stuck in the past or something, where he thinks that a country's glory is on their size or whatever. Russia is very huge already, and there's plenty of space for everyone there, and it's rich in natural resources, so I guess it's a cultural thing or something, but...
Well, I think that it is. I think that there is at least in the Russian ruling elite, there is a historically rooted political culture of imperialism and glorification of physical power or military power, and internally the glorification of authoritarian government, Secret Service power against anybody who sort of objects to what the rulers are doing, which is very sad because I think, Russians as ordinary folks deserve better than that. I mean, we see how talented and how intelligent and capable Russians can be when they are let out of their country. I mean, I think it was Google was started by at least one of the founders was Russian, Sergey Brin. We see Russians popping up elsewhere in kind of startups and new industries and everything. And when they're, allowed to develop freely, they're pretty nice folks and they're pretty smart folks. But now, they're still trapped in this political culture of autocracy and kind of, Secret Service style running of the government and of the state and of society.
What do you mean, Secret Service? We were just looking at the Salisbury Cathedral. It's 123 meters tall.
Yeah.
No, but brain drain is very real because, if you look at the past 20 years, you see more Russians getting Nobel Prizes in sciences with American citizenship than you see Russians with Russian citizenship.
Well, this is the point here. This is the point. Or also, probably even see a more thriving and interesting Russian culture developing in a place like Israel, even though where the official line is that once you've left your country, you should learn Hebrew and sing Hava Nagila or whatever you're supposed to do as a good Israeli. But even there, you have, and you have the IT folks and everything. So once you get the Russians out of the Russia of kind of secret police, authoritarianism, and sleazy dealings, and then they have some pretty interesting and dynamic people. But it's a shame that a fair amount of them are going to be dragged into a war now, and they're going to lose their lives for nothing.
Yeah, but to end this, do you really think that? What are the odds that you give for this to actually become a shooting war? I was skeptical about this at first, then it kind of increased again for a bit, and then it went down. But right now, I actually give it about 50-50 in my own head.
I'm sort of with you because I am a little bit put aback by this almost, alarmist certainty from the American side. And the only justification for that is that they probably have some incredibly good intelligence, signals intelligence, satellite intelligence, maybe even, British SAS troops maybe, wandering around the other side of the border, to see what's going on.
This is all really weird. Well, I hope it ends on the best way. Let's see how this goes, and if something starts out, I'll definitely reach out to you because.
Well, come back to me. Yes, we can talk about this again. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Thanks to Juris for coming over to the show, and thanks to everyone for listening. And check us out again next week when we'll have a bit more lighthearted episode. Such as they are on this show, but still.
If the war hasn't started, then you can be lighthearted. Yeah.
I guess so. Thank you.
All right, so long then. Thanks for having me.
До свидания, товарищ.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Border Show. If you have any questions or comments, go to our website, theeasternborder.lv, and leave a comment there. Or email us at theeasternborder@gmail.com. We'll be sure to answer. You can also follow us on social media and contact us there. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. It really helps us grow the show. And remember, happiness is mandatory.